On today's episode, Frank Nazar shines at the Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2. Make sure to also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey as well for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And last but certainly not least, got to let you all know today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Go and visit FanDuel.com right now to download America's number one sportsbook. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. I hope everyone out there had themselves a tremendous weekend. Still getting some summer-like weather here in the Chicagoland area. I believe that's actually supposed to continue on through the rest of this week, so make sure to enjoy it to all my Chicagoans out there, because as we have learned, things can change in the blink of an eye. I mean, fall can suddenly be here just like that, and none of us could see that coming, and all of a sudden, we're getting highs into the 50s and 60s. So be sure to enjoy this summer-like weather while it's still here. To open things up on today's episode, though, Blackhawks fans, of course, over the weekend, the Blackhawks took part in the Tom Kurvers Memorial Prospect Showcase that's in St. Louis this year before returning back to Chicago next year. And I have already broken down the opening game of the Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase for the Blackhawks, in which they fell to the St. Louis Blues 4-3 in overtime. Make sure to check out that episode so you're all caught up on things before diving into the second game and some of the greater takeaways from the Prospect Showcase that I'm going to get into here on today's show. And again, just as a reminder, please go smash the like button, comment down below, and especially subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Closing in on 2,000 subscribers. Really want to hit that number before the Blackhawks open things up on October 8th against the Utah Hockey Club. So please make sure to hit that button. 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help you out tremendously. But yeah, the Blackhawks, to wrap up their weekend, their second game of action was on Saturday night, a 6 p.m. Central Time puck drop against the Minnesota Wild's prospects, the other team that's involved in this showcase. But before I actually dive into the game itself, the Blackhawks suffered another bit of a tough break prior to the start of this game. As we know, they were already without Artem Levshinov, one of the most prominent names on the rookie roster, along with Frank Nazar. He's missing the entire weekend and probably all of training camp as well due to a right foot injury. The Blackhawks were also without both Alex Ferrand and Marcel this weekend due to injuries. And then just prior to Saturday night's contest against Minnesota, it was announced that Nick Lardis was going to be out as well due to an illness. And that really sucks, not only because the Blackhawks were already down a slew of players, but Lardis had himself a tremendous opening game on Friday night, scoring just over a minute into that contest, and then really going on to have a solid performance in multiple different ways in the rest of that game. And, you know, the Blackhawks really want to get back to playing that speedy, tenacious, buzzing up and down the ice type of style to make it really tough and rugged on their opponents. Nick Lardis absolutely has that speed, and we know he has the offensive abilities on top of it. I mean, that has been very evident based on what he's done with the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL these last couple of years. But I was also really impressed with his tenacity. And even though, you know, of the game away from the puck isn't necessarily a strength of his, I really like to see that Nick Lardis was involved on the forecheck, using his speed to impact the game in different ways when he doesn't have the puck. And, you know, he was engaged in board battles. I don't expect him to win very many of those, but I really like to see his compete level and overall just the pace that he plays with on top of the offensive abilities. I thought he got off to a really, really sound start to the showcase. And in that episode that I dropped on Saturday, recapping the first game, I mentioned I would have really liked to see Nick Lardis get an opportunity with Frank Nazar on that top line in the second game. But unfortunately, we know that wasn't going to happen because Lardis was out due to an injury. So in the second game, the Blackhawks were down Levshinov, Marcel, Ferrand, and Lardis. Definitely sucked because of that. they had to go with an 11 forward, 7 defenseman type of lineup, which for those Blackhawks fans out there who have been watching this team for a while, then you know that 11 forward, 7 defenseman method, for whatever reason, just never fares well for the Blackhawks at the NHL level. But fortunately, didn't stop the Blackhawks prospects from putting together a really solid performance in lieu of a bounce back victory after kind of letting one slip out of their grasp against the Blues on Friday night. After the Blackhawks fell behind 1-0 after 20 minutes in this game against Minnesota, they really pieced things together in the second period and got on the board to even up the score 1-1 from a goal from Frank Nazar. Beautiful feed from Martin Misiak as well on the power play. And then later on in the period, the Hawks struck again for their second power play goal of the period as Gavin Hayes found the back of the net after a little bit of a net front scramble. Minnesota would go on to even up the score once again, 2-2 through 40 minutes, but the Blackhawks put their best foot forward in the third period. Frank Nazar, as I'll talk about a little bit more here in just a second, sets up Ryder Rolston for a semi-breakaway. He buries it, winds up being the game-winning goal. Martin Misiak goes on to seal things late with the empty netter, and the Blackhawks come away with a rather solid 4-2 victory over the Minnesota Wild in a hard-fought and chippy type of game. I mean, this game really had no flow to it. Lots of penalties being called on both sides. And quite honestly, I thought the Minnesota Wild were really trying to test the Blackhawks out there. It felt like they were really trying to get under their skin in comparison to the first game. This one certainly had more chippiness. There was not a whole lot of flow. I felt like when I was watching this one, I envisioned this is what it was like. I don't have any kids, but I envisioned this was what it was like, or what it would be like to watch your 8 or 9-year-old go and play a hockey game. There's not a whole lot of flow to it, not a whole lot of action going on out there. You're kind of even wondering if this is really a hockey game. But what I like to see was the Blackhawks didn't back down. They didn't shy away from the physicality and mixing it up, and that's great. I mean, they have a lot of size. They have a lot of heart on this team, a lot of players who are willing to mix it up, and I like to see those guys not shy away from that style of play whatsoever. Samuel Savoie, AJ Spellacy was mixing it up. Colton Dock certainly was involved in every skirmish there was out there. Seemed again like he really has gotten the memo from the Blackhawks front office. Paul Ludwinski was mixing it up. Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen using their size on the back end to protect some of their teammates and protect their goaltender and whatnot. And I even like to see Frank Nazar be willing to kind of stand up for himself. And he even kind of mentioned after the game when going through and talking with the media that, it felt like the Minnesota Wild players were maybe trying to test him or get under his skin in particular. And he mentioned that he had kind of just had enough of it and was starting to throw some shots back out there. So I love to see that the Blackhawks didn't, back down one bit. They showed their size, they showed their fight, they showed their resiliency, and they came out with a hard-fought 4-2 victory while doing it. So I absolutely love that. However, the main takeaway that I got to get to from this weekend's Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase, and really in the second game against Minnesota, is that Frank Nazar was the best player on the ice. And that's absolutely what you want to see out of a player in his position. There's not really many players on this rookie camp roster that took part in this showcase that can actually make the Blackhawks opening night roster come October 8th. I think Frank Nazar might actually be the only one, quite honestly. I'll say Colton Dock probably has a shot as well, but this was the type of performance you absolutely wanted to see out of Frank Nazar, considering the position that he's in, getting off to a flaming hot start leading into training camp opening up this week. You wanted to see him dominate games against fellow prospects. You wanted to see him be able to be leaps and bounds against the competition level, and that's exactly what we saw, but mostly in this second game. And Nazar did get off to a really good start in the first game. He drew a penalty early on, picked up that power play primary assist to set up Nick Lardis and open up the scoring early. And I really liked his puck possession. That was maintained throughout the course of the opening game. And I talked about how I like to see him, recognize plays out there and try to get pucks into the dangerous areas, trying to set up teammates in the slot or right out in front of the net when they're open. I really liked his game recognition all in all. But I did think, whether it was due to fatigue or, the ice also wasn't in the best condition out there in Maryland Heights, Missouri, there were a couple different reasons I'm sure that led to Nazar's second half half of that opening game not quite being as strong as it was in the first half. I thought it was a little sloppy. He lacked a little consistency in the second half. And I also thought he was guilty of trying to do too much out there. Well, he really cleaned things up for in the second game, and from start to finish, he was absolutely flawless. He was dominant, and he was the best player out there on the ice. And I thought that was the case even in the first game against the St. Louis Blues. Dalibor Dvorsky had a lot of good opportunities, but most of that came on the power play. Frank Nazar, certainly in my opinion, was the most dominant puck carrier in both games over the weekend, and that's exactly what you wanted to see. He had the puck a ton. He was creating a lot of chances, scored goals, had beautiful assists, but I thought a perfect kind of embodiment of Frank Nazar's weekend came when he picked up the primary assist on Ryder Rolston's game-winning goal. And at that point in time, he had already scored the opening goal of the game. He also picked up a secondary assist on Gavin Hayes' power play goal that momentarily put the Blackhawks ahead 2-1. But with the game on tilt, it could go either way. And the Blackhawks, I mean, again, you don't really care about the final results of these games, but it would have been disappointing for them to drop both. And with the game in balance, 2-2 in the third period, Frank Nazar perfectly recognized that he had to take a hit to make a play. He knew he was going to get hit, but in doing so, he recognized he was going to spring a teammate of his for a semi-breakaway. Ryder Rolston winds up getting that opportunity because of the play Frank Nazar makes. He scores the game-winning goal. The Blackhawks wind up taking this one 4-2. So not only was it a three-point performance out of Frank Nazar, but he made the big plays when the game was could have been swung in other direction. I love to see that execution from Frank Nazar. And I just also love to see the mental maturity that he played with all week. I thought, again, that was perfectly captured in that moment, in that play that he made by taking a hit to set up Ryder Rolston for the game-winning goal. And he even talked about that after the game. And I love to hear kind of the comments and the swagger that Frank Nazar is playing with right now. And like I said, he talked about kind of Minnesota trying to get under his skin. He played with that edge, which I like to see out of an undersized player. He wasn't backing down whatsoever, but I also like to hear his comments after the game regarding that play as well. Frank said, quote, "All I thought was, okay, I'm going to get it. I'm going to make this play. And if this guy steps up, he's just dumb and he's giving a guy a breakaway. I don't know what he's thinking." And I also think Frank Nazar, just based on how Minnesota was playing, his comments, I think he kind of felt that they weren't really playing with skill. They were playing with a lot of emotion out there and a lot of physicality, and it felt like it wasn't the smart play. Frank Nazar he made the smarter play with the game on the line. And I love that he recognized it, and I love that he talked about how, hey, if he wants to go and make that hit, if he wants to go and make the quote unquote selfish type of play. And I'm not talking down about that prospect in particular for the Minnesota Wild or any of their prospects and how they played this game. It just felt like they were on edge and they weren't playing a smart style of hockey. And in that moment, Frank Nazar outsmarted his competitor, his opponent. He outsmarted the Minnesota Wild. And I love that he recognized that. And I love that he's saying, I'll make that play every day of the week. And I'm sure the Blackhawks coaching staff, the front office, everyone involved with the team, love to hear Nazar say that and love to see him make that type of play. Those are the exact type of plays that will get the coaching staff on notice. So love to see a huge weekend out of Frank Nazar at the Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase. Love to see the Blackhawks respond and bounce back with a 4-2 win to close things out on Saturday against the Minnesota Wild. There are all my thoughts from that second game and Frank Nazar's heck of a weekend. I'm going to take a quick break here, Blackhawks fans, but when I return, coming up in just a moment, I'll talk about some of the other standouts from this weekend in St. Louis. But first, I need to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. I know you've all heard about FanDuel at this point in time, right? But now FanDuel has something a little bit different for you. Starting now through September 22nd, which is coming to an end here. You only got 1 week left, so make sure to take advantage of this incredible offer as FanDuel is offering all customers, if you bet $5 down, you'll get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. You won't be just stuck with the Chicago Bears, which little bit of a toughie on Sunday night against the Texans. The offensive line certainly didn't hold up for Caleb Williams. I hope I'm providing all of you Bears fans out there with a nice little mental break away from what happened last night. I promise I won't be talking about them anymore. But if you do want to bet the Chicago Bears in their home opener next week, if you're going to bet on them to have a bounce back, just like the Chicago Blackhawks did this weekend, then make sure to go and check out FanDuel.com, because if you're not already a member, all you got to do is sign up with FanDuel, bet $5 down, and you'll get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. And by the way, you can also cancel anytime, anywhere if you're not happy with what you purchased. So make sure to go and check out FanDuel.com right now to download America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just want to say again, thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. And a reminder, we are back with 5 episodes every single week, an episode coming out every single day. Training camp is kicking off on Thursday later on this week. Couldn't be more excited for Blackhawks hockey to be back in action. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And also make sure to go and check out the new Locked On. Actually, it's not new. It's coming back. I'm so used to saying the new Locked On Sports Today. No, go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast for your second listen, where the action never ends, with the local expertise from every host of the Locked On NHL podcast. You can go and find the link to Locked On NHL down in the description, or you can simply search for Locked On NHL wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2. Not only did Frank Nazar shine during both games over the weekend in St. Louis, but I did want to be sure to give some other players their flowers for solid performances. First man up, I got to give a shout out to Ben Gaudreau. It's not Goudreau, it's Gaudreau, who earned an AHL contract with the Rockford IceHogs, inked that on July 1st this past summer. And he had a really solid performance in the second game against Minnesota. A huge reason why the Blackhawks were able to pick up this victory. In particular, the second and third periods, he was really dynamite, did not allow a goal in the third. Like I said, a huge reason the Blackhawks were able to come away on top 4-2. And quite honestly, I'm not going to put much stock into this because, again, it's a small sample size, only 2 games of action in a prospect exhibition tournament. And also it's the first bit of action that both of these guys have had for several months now, and that's kind of the story with everyone involved in this Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase. I'm not going to put too much stock in it, good or bad, although I did want to see Frank Nazar dominate the way that he did this weekend, so that absolutely was a huge box to check off. But Ben Gaudreau did outperform Drew Commesso this weekend. He was better than Drew Commesso. If you go one-on-one, who was better between the two? Ben Gaudreau was better than Drew Commesso was this weekend. Now, that has no inkling in terms of who is going to be the better goalie for the Rockford IceHogs this year. And quite honestly, given that Commesso and Arvid Soderblom are going to be in Rockford, I would expect Ben Gaudreau to spend a good amount of time with the Indy Fuel in the ECHL. However, I'm just happy for the lad, coming on to a stage like this and performing rather well as a backup, not really any expectations for him. I'm happy Ben Gaudreau was able to put together the performance that he did to help lead the Blackhawks to victory. And I'm sure there was something that the Blackhawks organization liked when they saw him play for the Erie Otters of the OHL these last couple of years, a teammate of Martin Misiak, who I'll have more on here in just a second. But there must have been something that they liked in his game. And he actually, if you go and do your homework on Ben Gaudreau, someone who had represented Canada on the international scene quite a lot and was a decently regarded goalie prospect when he was a little bit younger, but just never really found his footing in junior these past couple of years. But getting an opportunity here in the Blackhawks organization. Again, I don't know how many actual starts he's going to make for the Rockford IceHogs this year, but got to tip my cap to Ben Gaudreau for a heck of a performance on Friday night. Without him playing that well, I don't know if the Blackhawks wind up splitting their 2 games in St. Louis this weekend. I also wanted to give a shout out to both Ethan Del Mastro and Nolan Allen. And I actually had some people in the comment section and responding to some of my takeaways on X, like arguing that Nolan Allen had a really good performance. And I thought Nolan Allen looked fine, especially like in defensive positions. Like he was in the right spot. He was blocking shots. He was showing his physicality. He was cleaning out the crease in front of his goaltender. I thought he was doing good work along the boards. I just thought both he and Ethan Del Mastro didn't really have good outlet passes in that opening game. There were a lot of plays that should have gotten out of the defensive zone that didn't. But again, I'm not going to hold that against them because this was their first game-like action in several months. And for Nolan Allen, I mean, this was his first game action since coming off of that torn MCL that forced him to miss the end of his first pro season with the Rockford Ice Hogs. But I thought both of them bounced back nicely in the second game against Minnesota. Del Mastro was a lot more poised with the puck than he was in the first game. I thought was very patient and had a really nice primary assist to set up Gavin Hayes on the Blackhawks' second power play goal of that second period. Good play recognition with a little bit of a mad scramble in front. The goaltender had lost his positioning and lost his footing. He recognized that he just didn't need to fire that one on net from the top of the point. No, he passed it over to Gavin Hayes as the defense was out of position, and that led to him getting a yawning cage. So happy to see both Ethan Del Mastro and Nolan Allen kind of close things out on a better foot this weekend than they certainly started things. Paul Ludwinski, I also thought was noticeable for the second consecutive game, mostly just, man, because of the pace he plays with. I did not think he was that good of a skater, and I've been keeping up with his highlights down with the Kingston Frontenacs these past couple of years, serving as captain, and I knew his offensive game took a nice noticeable stride this past year compared to 2 years ago when he was first drafted by the Blackhawks, which the beginning of that year was stymied a little bit due to a concussion that he actually suffered during this Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase. But I certainly think he's more capable offensively because of that speed that he plays with and just all in all, the impact that he can make on both sides of the ice. He's also a decently big kid too, not maybe the most rugged and is not going to lay a booming hit or anything, but he's another guy who is willing to mix it up and again, can buzz up and down the ice in a hurry. That's the style the Blackhawks really want to get back to playing. I thought Paul Ludwinski perfectly embodied that in both of the games this weekend. Ryder Rolston, like to see him make an impact in the second game, winding up with the game-winning goal. Another guy who has really good wheels and a really good shot. Whenever I talk about Ryder Rolston, those are the two things that I always mention. I thought that pace was very evident in this second game. And really, those wheels are what led to him getting that semi-breakaway opportunity, along with the play recognition by Frank Nazar. But nice to see Ryder Rolston wind up with the game-winning goal and wind up on the stat sheet here over the weekend. And it's going to be a big year for him with the Ice Hogs as one of the so-called veteran players in that forward group. It's going to be young up front for Rockford, but he's going to be one of the guys that is looked on as a little bit of a veteran this year. And I'm sure he still has hopes of trying to get to the NHL level, even though hasn't been quite as successful at doing that since turning pro out of Notre Dame. I also wanted to give love to Martin Misiak as well. I hope I didn't sound like I was dogging him when I brought him up on Friday night, because quite honestly, if anything, even though he is clearly needing to add on some weight and is clearly undersized for wanting to play against grown men at this stage of his development, his skill was there both Friday and Saturday. It's not jaw-dropping skill. I don't ever think he's going to be like a legit puck handler at the next level, but his play recognition was really solid, and he made some really savvy passes. On Friday, he set up AJ Spellacy in transition, found him in the neutral zone, entering the offensive zone with speed, got him the puck. That wound up leading to a goal for Spellacy, with Misiak picking up the primary assist. He also had a beautiful saucer pass to set up Frank Nazar for the Blackhawks' opening goal of the game. And Nazar even said to the media after that was absolutely nasty, and all he had to do was really put his stick down on the ice, and the puck found its way onto the tape for him to put it 5-hole for an easy tap-in goal. But yeah, some good skill plays by Martin Misiak. Wound up with the empty netter as well in the second game. So 3 points out of Misiak in 2 games worth of action. Really solid stuff, again, for a kid who is clearly undersized and needs to grow into his body a little bit more before making that full-time leap to the pro hockey scene. Hopefully this gives him a little bit of confidence, though. I envision, because he is going back to junior, maybe he'll get some preseason action. I'll get to that in just a second here. I imagine, though, he'll probably be among the first roster cuts, and we'll probably go back to Erie pretty early, but I hope he takes some of this momentum over and carries that over to the start of the OHL campaign where, he should get one heck of an opportunity with the Erie Otters somewhere in the top 6. Not exactly sure if it's going to be center or on the wing. He kind of split time between both last year, but a really good prospect showcase, I thought, for Martin Misiak. And then one final shout out to Colton Dach, because he was among the most noticeable guys who were sticking up for teammates, mixing it up, getting into skirmishes with Minnesota Wild players. And he was really doing that same type of stuff on Friday against the Blues as well, right? Playing a real power forward type of style, playing with a lot of energy, playing with a lot of motion out there. And I thought he kept it in check for the most part. He wasn't really doing anything egregious or being too much out there. It just feels like he's gotten the message that the Blackhawks organization kind of sent to him. And we know he's James Bond, man on a mission, trying to earn a job once training camp comes to a close, along with Frank Nazar, as I talked about earlier. Probably the only two guys taking part in this rookie camp that actually have a shot of doing so, but I thought both of them had really solid performances over the weekend in St. Louis. One final thing that I did want to get to before jumping over to segment 3, getting into Mailbag Monday, some of the players from this Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase that I would like to see get a little bit of extended preseason action to see what they have in store against grown men at this point in time, because we got to see how they fare against fellow prospects, fellow guys who aren't NHL or pro ready for the most part. But preseason action is a different type of ball game. So I certainly would like to see some of these guys get some looks. Obviously, Frank Nazar and Colton Dach, we know they're going to be getting opportunities. Landon Slaggert's probably in that group as well, right? I think he's on the outside looking in, but still, if he has a sharp preseason and training camp, there is a chance that he makes the opening night roster. But too importantly for me, Nick Lardis, hopefully that illness isn't going to kind of take him off his game for too long. Hopefully he'll be fully ready to go when training camp opens up later this week on Thursday. But he and Paul Ludwinski are two guys who I really want to see what they have in store against grown men in preseason type of action. I know they got looks for the Blackhawks in the preseason last year, so certainly expect them to get more this year. Gavin Hayes, I would like to see what he has in store against grown men as well. Kind of had a ho-hum prospect tournament, did of course score a goal on Saturday against Minnesota, but he's someone who can really shoot the puck. I really like him in particular in the bumper role because he can fire one-timers off in a hurry, a 40-goal scorer each of the last 2 years in the OHL, and has some good size along with him as well. So want to see how he mixes it up against grown men. And then same with AJ Spellacy. I want to see how that body and that speed holds up against pros. And then Martin Misiak as well. Before he goes back to Erie, give him a game or two in the preseason to just kind of see where he's at, because he made some heads up plays. I know he's undersized. I know he has to gain weight. But there were some savvy hockey plays that he made out there. So those are some of the guys in particular that I'm looking forward to seeing in action during the preseason, which is just about a week and a half away, Blackhawks fans. Life is coming at us fast here in September, but there are my final thoughts from the Tom Kurvers Prospect Showcase this weekend in Minnesota. Coming up here in just a second, still got to get into our weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Real quick, just another reminder to please go and hit that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. Thank you very much. And if you're tuning in through an audio platform, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be, please make sure to go and rate and review the show as well, preferably with a 5-star rating. Those always put a big smile on my face. But that also helps me out tremendously, goes a long way, and won't cost you anything, is 100% free. But before I wrap things up, still got to get into Mailbag Monday. And with the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, switching back to 5 episodes per week, Mailbag Monday is going to be back in full store. So make sure if you didn't get your Blackhawks question in for this week, drop them down below in the comment section right now. I obviously can't get to them on today's episode, but I'll make sure to put a little star next to them and get to them 1 week from today when I run Mailbag Monday back next week. But the first Blackhawks question that I have here today comes from D Paris 2172 on YouTube, who asked, this is a long one, but I'll try to get to everything here. Jack, what do you think the chances are of Kevin Korchinski starting the year in Rockford? In my opinion, there is much developing to be had for him with the Ice Hogs. Most games last season, he was chasing his tail around the ice like he was on fire. Sure, it was an experience, but how much actual development could have taken place in such an environment? The only way I would be comfortable with him making the team out of camp as if he was blowing everyone away in the preseason, and it was absolutely obvious that he's ready for the NHL. First things first, what do you think the chances are of Kevin Korchinski starting the year in Rockford? Probably 50-50, maybe even 60-40 that he starts the year with the Rockford Ice Hogs. I kind of agree with this. I think he has to have a really standout camp in order to make the Blackhawks roster for October 8th against Utah. I would say it's even the more unlikely of the two sides, just given how the Blackhawks have kind of handled all of these prospects over the last couple of years since Kyle Davidson stepped in. And had they had their choice last year, Kevin Korchinski would have been in the AHL. Now, I'm not going to go back and forth about whether having him turn pro or, whether going back to Seattle would have been more beneficial for him. It's all in hindsight now. Everything's 2020, right? But I do think he still learned from what went down last year. Yeah, I agree. He was chasing his tail like it was on fire, and he was a little hung out to dry out there. You got to remember, though, not only was Connor Bedard the youngest player in the NHL, Kevin Korchinski was the youngest defenseman in the entire NHL. And, oh, yeah, he really didn't have a D partner for the majority of the year. I love Connor Murphy. He just hasn't been as steady these last couple of seasons. Then he was hurt for a lot of the second half. Kevin Korchinski had to play with Jacob Megna, who's respectfully a seventh defenseman, probably not even that on a playoff caliber team, right? So wasn't exactly an ideal situation for Kevin Korchinski, but I still think he learned a lot about himself, about the NHL level, about the speed of the game, about what it takes to be a pro. Even though it didn't go smashingly successful for him on the ice, I still think there were lots of takeaways. But as far as his likelihood of making the Blackhawks roster out of camp, yeah, I agree. He's got to have a really solid performance during the preseason and in training camp to prove to this coaching staff that he's ready for that level. But I would say the more likely outcome is that Kevin Korchinski opens things up with the Rockford Ice Hogs. We've seen the Hawks go that way with just too many defenseman prospects these past few years, and I really think they should have gone that way with Adam Boqvist, and they probably regret not doing that, even though it's obviously a new regime in place. Next question here comes from Luke Heinzman on YouTube, who asked, future mailbag question, how worried are you about the Hawks missing out on a top 5 pick and not filling in another star level forward? I will say I'm not really worried about the Blackhawks missing out on a top 5 pick. I don't really think that's at the forefront of the organization's minds any longer, and I think they're quite honestly focused on taking that next step, and I really do believe they're at that point in time. I will admit, though, I am a little concerned about them not having another star-level forward, and that's why I really would have taken Ivan Demidov with the second overall pick, because it's not like the Blackhawks' blue line is lackluster in terms of prospects. Did they need to add another right-handed defenseman? Yes, absolutely. Was Artem Levshinov deserving of being the first defenseman off the board? In my mind, absolutely. If they were going defenseman, Artem Levshinov checked off a lot of boxes. But Ivan Demidov would have checked off a lot of boxes up front as well. And I think the Blackhawks are now going to have no choice but to go and spend a lot of money on the free agent market to get a top-line winger along with Connor Bedard of the future, because that's kind of what they're really missing. I have a lot of high hopes for Frank Nazar, but I still think there's going to have to be another piece in this forward group that has star power for the Blackhawks to hit that next gear. When they add that piece, whether it's this summer 2025, 26, that's kind of the question. Next one here is from SGK43DR3 on X. That is a mouthful. Who asked, AJ Spellacy, NHLer, you think, Jack? I know it was just one weekend, but he looks dynamite. I will say there certainly is potential because of the pace that he plays with, which is just so prevalent in today's game. If you don't really skate well, it's just hard to see you having a chance, even if you do have some good skill. He certainly checks that box, and he has a lot of size and isn't afraid to play with it. I've also spoken time and time again about what a freak athlete AJ Spellacy is, and it seems like he has all the work ethic, so I wouldn't be surprised. He certainly has a capped ceiling, though, because of the lack of offensive abilities, but that pace that he plays with is always going to give him a chance, along with the style of play. It's unique for the Blackhawks forward group. Yeah, I do think AJ Spellacy certainly could be an NHLer. How good? To be determined. Next question comes from Grace Helton on YouTube, who asked, odds Blackhawks don't figure things out with Comcast. I'm getting worried, Jack. Grace, I wouldn't panic just yet. As I talked about on Friday, Saturday, can't even remember when it was. I think it was Saturday. These things usually do wind up coming down to the deadline. And quite honestly, I think Comcast is the next big box for CHSN to kick down. I would be absolutely stunned if they don't wind up with a deal with Comcast, because the Blackhawks, the organization knows if they don't have Comcast, they're losing out on millions of eyeballs in the Chicagoland area. that in turn loses them money. And guess what? Money runs the world. So don't think that's going to happen. I'd be stunned if Comcast winds up not getting a deal. Remain patient, though, Grace. These things can take a little bit. Next question comes from Barney Gumble 2990, which is maybe one of the funniest email handles I've ever heard of, who asked, best part and worst part of doing a sports podcast? Thinking about starting one and interested in getting as much input as I can from people in the industry. Thanks. And this is always a reminder. You don't have to reach out with Blackhawks questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you got for me. Throw them this way. If you want to just have fun and ask me random shit from across the board, I'm here willing to do it. What I will say, Barney, is if that's your real name, best part about doing a sports podcast is, man, there's just a lot of great things about it. When you smash an episode, and you put everything together and you put your thoughts out there and kind of perfectly tied it all together in a bow, there's really no feeling like that. It makes you feel like your art has meaning and you're in a result that kind of makes you more motivated to go and do it again. And I think that's just kind of the beauty of creation and kind of doing your own thing and making your own things, when it does come together and winds up being as right as you envision it in your mind. It's like the most satisfying feeling in the world. And then you want to go and do it again and again and again. I really enjoy that artistic type of style of it. The worst part is just the little nitty gritty details, man. You don't really realize it until you're in the industry. But I mean, just even for one single show, I could tell you guys all what goes into it. I mean, I have to put together the background. I have to make the thumbnail. I have to write up the description. I have to edit my audio. I have to edit my video. I got to upload it to YouTube. I got to fill in all the audio tags. I got to put in ad placements. I got to put in ad placements on the audio side of things. I got to trim the audio down. I got to share it. I got to convert the file. I got to upload it. I got to put in ad markers. There's a lot that goes into it that you don't probably recognize. It's not just, talking into a camera on a day-to-day basis. It is very complicated. But again, when you do kind of get in that groove and put it all together, it is very, very satisfying. So I hope that kind of gave you some insight, Barney, and I would say absolutely go for it. If you don't try, you'll never know that it can turn out better than you even imagine. One of my favorite pieces of advice I've ever heard. What if it turns out better than you imagine? Next question comes from one of my buddies, Quinn Conlist, who asked, Blackhawks Blues rivalry back again? I sure hope so, man. It is a rivalry that I really miss. Both of these organizations, I mean, the Blackhawks more so than the Blues, obviously, have been down in the dumps these last couple of years. But man, going to college in Missouri as a huge Blackhawks fan, getting chirped day in and day out as I'm wearing my Patty Kane sweater when the Hawks and Blues are taking on each other in the first round of 2016. Going to that, still the last Blackhawks playoff victory, true playoff victory, Game 6, 2016 at the United Center against St. Louis. Fortunate enough to be in attendance, the loudest I had ever heard the United Center in person. And I'll tell you what, it was because we were beating the St. Louis Blues. On both sides, Blackhawks fans and Blues fans care about this rivalry. Really hope it gets sparked up heavily again this season and more times moving forward. Last couple sets of questions here. PHHDVM on YouTube had a two-parter. First one is, Jack, I'm curious whether you think Colton Dach has what it takes to be a part of the picture for the Blackhawks. I think he's gotten off to a great start to rookie camp here this year. Seems like he's taken on kind of the comments that the organization has given him as far as what he needs to do to reach that next level and to achieve his goal. I think he's kind of taken that on full force and has really reciprocated that well. My question for Colton Dach is, my questions have always been around the skating, and I love to hear that he really worked on his foot speed and his pace this year, because if he improves in that area, I really like his chances because of his size and his shot. I don't think he's ever going to be much of a playmaker, and I don't really mean this negatively. I think he's a shot first type of player. I don't think he's out there looking to pass the puck. I think he believes in his instincts, trusts himself. He'll shoot from dirty areas, all areas on the ice, but that's his style of play, and he has a good shot. I think that's his best asset. I just have concerns about the injuries, man. He's been really injury plagued at a young age. There's no telling as to whether that's going to continue to plague him moving forward, but it really has held him back these last couple of years. So the foot speed, the pace, and kind of the injury bug leads me to be a little bit concerned. I do think he'll wind up being a bottom six type of guy for the Blackhawks, but I don't ever think he's really going to be a star here in Chicago. Next question, second part of this comes from the same person, I should say. Sorry. Second question is Reichel. The top six looks crowded. He just doesn't seem like a bottom six role suits him. Rockford doesn't look like an option. His trade value seems limited. What do you see happening with him? Yeah, I mean, this is all kind of on the money and why this is a really big make or break type of year for Lukas Reichel. And I do think he probably opens things up on the third line for the Blackhawks. If I had to guess, maybe the second line. But what I will say is there is absolutely more skill on the third line than there has been in the past. And Reichel needs to play with skill guys. That seems very, very evident. Doesn't seem like he's ever going to be a driver of play by himself. I do think he has those capabilities, and I wouldn't be absolutely stunned to see if he goes and becomes more of a dominant puck carrier this year, but I don't think he's ever going to play center, and as the wing, you're just limited in those opportunities, but he has to play with skill guys. The Blackhawks have better situation for him than they ever have if he is going to be a third liner. But at the end of the day, it's just got to come down to Lukas Reichel executing, getting out there on the ice and being the player we know he's capable of being. The consistency, it's almost like Philip Kurashev level of inconsistency up until this year. What Philip Kurashev did this past year for the Blackhawks, I really hope is what we'll see out of Lukas Reichel. But I certainly do have more concerns about him than I did, 365 days ago when he was an absolute standout for the Blackhawks during training camp. Second to last question here comes from franr32@gmail.com, who emailed in and asked, will we see Cole Gutman in the NHL this year? Always liked the kid, but didn't think he got much of a chance last year. Certainly on the outside looking in, behind probably Slaggert, Doc, Frank Nazar as well in the pecking order. So I'd expect him to open things up in Rockford for the third consecutive year, but that hasn't stopped him from getting to the NHL level. I mean, he has been a very, very productive player down in Rockford. Unfortunate that he got hurt late last year and wasn't really able to finish off the year with the momentum that he had built. If he picks up where he left off in the AHL level last year and continues to be the type of player that we have seen him be at that level, yeah, I think we will see him at the NHL level this year. As far as whether he'll stick around and be a everyday NHLer, the jury's still kind of out on that one. I'm probably going to lean towards no. He'll probably always be more of a fringe style player, but I'm a fan of Cole Gutman. I like his game. He's, of course, a former guest here on the podcast, so I'll be rooting for Cole, whether it's in Rockford or in Chicago. I'm always hoping for the best out of number 70. And then last but certainly not least, from Polly Seskel on YouTube, who asked, better chance of making the team out of camp, Wyatt Kaiser or Kevin Korchinski? Good one. I'm going to go with Wyatt Kaiser just because of his age, his experience. He got time with the Ice Hogs late last year and performed pretty well. I'm sure he was disappointed by being reassigned after a standout camp, got him a spot on the opening night roster, but I think he was pretty clearly a little bit in over his head, which isn't the worst thing in the world. And that doesn't mean that Wyatt Kaiser is going to be a bad NHLer. It just means he wasn't ready at that point in time. And as far as who's more ready, Kaiser or Korchinski, I think Kaiser is probably the more ready of the two. Kevin Korchinski absolutely has the better skills, but as far as how the Blackhawks have gone about handling these things under Kyle Davidson, I would say the likelihood certainly leans with the older player in Wyatt Kaiser. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. I know it was a bit of a beefy one, but just want to say thank you to everyone who stuck around until the end. And again, be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may be listening to your podcast. If you're on the go or wanting to tune into an episode during your lunch and you're not able to watch on YouTube, you can follow the podcast 100% free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. If you want to follow me on X, you can find me at Jack Bushman 2. Be sure to check out my Strictly Blackhawks account as well at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, everyone, again, 5 days a week coming back here this week with training camp opening up. So I'll be back here tomorrow afternoon. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.